A stone sings in the air. It hums like a swallow's wing, slicing the heat of a noon sun. The valley holds its breath. A giant's laugh stiffens into a question. Dust hangs. A shepherd's heart beats once, twice, and in the space between fear and faith, something eternal happens. Before the stone lands, we go back, because this moment was forged in nights no one saw. But the story didn't begin with a sling. It began with a song in a lonely night, when the only audience was sheep and stars and the God who watches over both. In the hills of Bethlehem, a boy named David walked the ridge with a staff in hand and a harp on his back. He knew the names of the constellations in the way shepherds do, by the warmth they leave on the back of your neck when you've stared too long. He knew the sounds his flock made when something was wrong, the flat panic that ripples across wool like wind over water. He knew that sometimes the quiet of the night is not peace but potential, and that the smallest breath can wake a lion. His brothers were taller than him, warriors and woodcutters, men whose hands could split logs and bludgeon hogs. Still, it was David, the youngest, who learned to carry two worlds at once, the silence of prayer and the suddenness of danger. He sang about both. His songs smelled like wet grass and anointing oil, like fresh bread and the ash of burned offerings. He sang about the Lord as if God were not far away upon a mountain, but close, closer than the pulse at the throat, closer than the warm exhale of a lamb asleep in your lap. On a day like any other, a stranger came to Bethlehem with a horn of oil and a burden from God. The prophet Samuel stepped into Jesse's house, and the room changed temperature. One by one, the sons passed before him, Eliab first, with a warrior's face and a soldier's height. Surely the Lord's anointed stands here, Samuel thought. But the Lord whispered a correction that would ring through history. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. 7 brothers later, the old man asked the question that turned small towns inside out. "Are these all the sons you have?" Jesse hesitated. "There is still the youngest. He is tending the sheep." They sent for him, dirt on his hands, sun on his cheeks, music in his bones. The prophet's hand grew heavy as oil flowed over David's hair, down his face, soaking a boy with a future he could not yet see. The Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him from that day. And then, as anointed boys do, he went back to the sheep. In those nights he practiced the sling the way a priest practices prayer, not to impress anyone, not because he thought it mattered, but because he had learned that God often places deliverance in ordinary hands and asks them to be ready. A moving knot on a log at 50 paces, a bottle gourd hung from a thorn bush, a silence, then snap. In the still dark he counted the hums around the sling's circle, felt the reach of momentum, learned wind's habits, and found that patience is accuracy in slow motion. Once, when the moon hung white and low, the flock trembled like a drum. A lion slid out of the tall grass as if poured from the night itself. David saw the flash of muscles under fur, heard the scrape of claws over stone. It took a lamb and turned to carry it away, just a lamb, the kind men count as losses. But a shepherd counts differently. David ran. The world narrowed to breath and courage. He struck the beast and pulled the warm, trembling life from its jaws. When the lion turned, anger blooming in yellow eyes, the boy did not retreat. He grabbed a handful of its mane, wild, primal, felt its roar rattle the meat of his chest, and killed it with strength no boy should own. Later, a bear came, thick and low, a rolling boulder of hunger. the same story, the same rescue, and every victory braided into a rope he would one day hold in a valley. Across the hills, a valley shaped like an open hand waited. The valley of Allah lay between two slopes, a ribbon of dry streambed curling through it, the rocks there smoothed by centuries of winter flow. Israel's tents trembled the way leaves do before a storm. The Philistines' banners snapped like whips in the wind. At the center of it all stood fear wearing a face. 9 feet of laughter and meat and metal, bronze that drank sunlight, a spear like a weaver's beam, iron like an ox's jaw. His armor seemed to weigh more than some men. The Philistine champion had a name that meant something like exile or stranger, but no one called him that. They called him Goliath, and Goliath woke each morning to the sound of his own applause. He was the sermon fear preaches on days when the sky looks too big and faith feels too small. For 40 days he strutted into the space between armies and spat out a challenge. Bring me your best. Bring me your bravest. Send me your king. Choose a man to fight. If he kills me, we are yours. But if I kill him, you are mine. The words bounced off shields, slid under helmets, and nested in hearts. The strongest of them looked down at their hands and wondered when they'd started trembling. Even Saul, the king who once hid behind baggage to avoid a crown, felt the old panic return like an uninvited guest. He had a sword at his hip and a prophet's words pounding in his ears, words about a kingdom torn and a heart that had drifted. He had a story in which he was the hero, but stories can change shape when fear enters the room. On the 41st morning, a boy walked toward the battle carrying bread. Jesse, David's father, had packed cheese for the commander and barley loaves for the sons. The road was dusty. The day felt tired before it began. David's sandals scuffed, and each step tugged him between two worlds, a valley full of spears and a hillside full of sheep bleating like unanswered prayers. He found his brothers among the tall men, found Eliab the eldest with a jaw like a shovel blade and a voice half thunder and half echo. "What are you doing here?" Eliab asked. He didn't wait for an answer. Brothers don't require questions when they already have conclusions. "I know your pride. I know the evil in your heart. You just wanted to see the battle." David bit back a reply because he had learned from the hills that sometimes silence is a stronger defense than argument. The boy who had wrestled lambs from lions would not wrestle his brother for approval. He looked out over the valley instead, and that's when he heard it. Not laughter, not the clatter of armor, a voice like rust grinding against rock. "Choose a man, let him come." David tilted his head, the way a dog does when it hears a sound too high for humans. He let the challenge sink into him, and then he asked the question that made every sword hand around him tighten. "What will be done for the man who kills him?" The men answered, "Riches, the king's daughter, the end of taxes for his family." It sounded like a game. It sounded like someone had pumped money into a slot machine and grabbed a boy from the fields to pull the lever. But David's eyes didn't move to the promises. They moved to the problem no one was naming. "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine?" he said, his voice quiet and clear, "that he should defy the armies of the living God." There are moments when you say a thing you think is obvious and discover you are alone in it. The air went stranger. Men shifted their weight. Some looked at their feet. Others looked at the horizon as if it could translate this boy's audacity into something less risky. Eliab flushed, embarrassed, angry, protective, all at once. "Go home," he said. But a whisper had begun among the men, and whispers have feet. They carried words up the hill and into tents where kings sit staring at their own hands. They carried it to Saul, and the king sent for the boy. David entered. He'd been here before with a harp to soothe the king's tormented spirit, because music sometimes holds together what fear is tearing apart. But today the song was different. "I've heard," Saul said, trying to sound like his voice wasn't made of thread, "that you say you can fight him." David didn't say he could. He said he would. "Let no one lose heart because of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." There are words so light they vanish at the first touch of doubt. David's weren't like that. They fell into the tent like stones in a river and made ripples that touched everything. Saul looked at the boy and did prophetic math, measuring height and muscle and age with numbers too small to fill a battlefield. "You are not able," the king said, and the words felt familiar somehow, like an old habit. "You are only a boy, and he has been a warrior from his youth." David could have defended his vitality like a teenager who thinks strength is everything. He didn't. He spoke instead about sheep. "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and took a lamb, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the lamb from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair and struck it and killed it. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." He didn't brag, he testified. He didn't promise he would win. He promised he would go because God had already taught him how to be small and sure. Something in Saul sagged and then straightened. He nodded in that way men nod when the thing they wanted to say loses to the thing that needs to be said. "Go," the king answered, "and the Lord be with you." He offered his armor, the best mask to match the part the boy was about to play, a bronze helmet, a coat of mail, a sword that shone like certainty. David strapped on the helmet. He tried the sword. He walked 3 steps like a man learning to swim in iron and almost laughed because he remembered the way he walked as a child in his father's oversized sandals. He shook his head. "I cannot go in these," he said. "I am not used to them." He took them off, and for a moment he stood there naked of every expectation that men place on men when they're afraid. He looked like a shepherd because he was a shepherd. That was the point. He reached for the things his hands already knew, a staff, a sling. Then he took a quiet walk to the edge of the valley where a brook whispered over stones smooth as secrets. On one ridge Israel watched. On the other Philistia jeered. Between them a thin ribbon of water and choice. He knelt. That's where trust gets decided, not in the shout but in the bend. He dipped his fingers into the cold and he chose 5 stones. Some say he picked 5 because of Goliath's brothers. Some say 5 because grace has a number, or because the boy who could not weigh himself in armor found balance in handfuls. The truth is simpler and harder. He chose 5 because faith is not a coin toss. Faith plans to trust again and again until obedience outlasts uncertainty. He placed the stones in his pouch, the way a faithful man places memories in his mind, testimonies of lions and bears, songs that kept him afloat when fear tried to drown him. Then he straightened, looked across the valley, and stepped down into a silence that felt enormous. The Israelites exhaled as if they had been holding their breath for 40 days. The Philistines laughed like thunder rolling across a dead field. The boy walked anyway. Goliath squinted, confused. He tried to find the joke in what he was seeing, and failing that, he decided to invent one. "Am I a dog," he shouted, "that you come at me with sticks?" His shield-bearer glanced back, a boy himself carrying a great round wall of bronze. He had dreams of going home with a story, but not this one. Not the story where the giant becomes a punchline. He edged forward the way you do when the script goes strange and you're not sure where to stand. The giant cursed David by his gods and named the places the boy's body would feed. The birds, the wild dogs, the things that come when it is over. David answered without reaching for a stone. "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin," he said, "but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel's armies whom you have defied. This day the Lord will hand you over to me. I will strike you down and cut off your head. This very day the whole world will know there is a God in Israel. It is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves. The battle is the Lord's." The words didn't bounce off bronze. They went through it. The valley heard that a name is not a sound but a weight, and the boy's God had hefted this moment like a crown. There is a courage that arrives loud and sharp like lightning, and there is courage that comes in rounds, in breaths, in the steady repetition of a heart that refuses to surrender before it must. David's courage was the second kind. He did not wait for the giant to charge. He ran toward him. But wind the story back again, because if we run too quickly, we miss what makes this moment holy. Before David ran, he remembered something. He remembered a prophet's hand heavy with oil on his hair, and the way the oil had dripped down into his eyebrows and lashes, and how he had tasted it when he licked his lips, and how something like fire had settled in his chest without burning him. He had been told, in a small, quiet room, that God had a plan that outran his years. He remembered how his father had left him with the sheep that day, not knowing. He remembered how his brothers had looked at him and seen a boy, how he had played for a king and watched a man unravel because power is a poor pillow when God has stepped away. He remembered the lion, its breath like meat and howl, its eyes like furnaces, its weight, and the way the staff felt small in his hands until it didn't. He remembered the bear, the roughness of its coat, the wild fear that surged and then sank into trust. He remembered that he had not saved sheep because he was skilled, but because the Lord was near. All of these memories braided into a rope, and he held that rope now like a lifeline. The boy adjusted his sling. The sling adjusted the boy. He set his feet. He found not the best position for power but the truest position for faith. Then he ran. It is hard to describe what happens next without falling into either exaggeration or understatement. The sling arcs. It circles. It sings. The world compresses to a single point small enough to fit between a man's brows. The giant lifts his chin like pride does. The stone leaves the sling with a kind of authority that comes only when obedience meets purpose. It strikes. Sound does not arrive in time. Sight arrives first. Then a sudden silence, then a roll of shock like a wave. The stone sinks into the giant's forehead as if the skin there had been waiting its whole life to let grace in. The laughter stops. Eyes widen. Knees buckle. Earth reaches up as if to catch a child. Goliath falls forward, face down, the way sacrifices fall, and the valley is no longer a place of fear but a place of offering. David stands there for a heartbeat longer than he needs to, because sometimes victory takes a second to believe. Then he runs forward. He does not have a sword, so he borrows the giant's. It takes both his hands to lift it. He leans into the weight of what he is about to do. He slices through the last thread connecting Israel's fear to its future. The sword falls heavy. And on that day in that valley, a boy cut down a giant with the giant's own blade. The Philistines see the shape of something that terrifies armies. The knowledge that their God had been defied by a name they do not know, and that the might that promised them safety evaporated like dew. They turn, as one organism turns, and they run. The Israelites, who had been stepping backward for 40 days, step forward all at once. A shout rises that sounds like a lifetime's worth of swallowed courage finally being spit out. But this is not a story about armies. This is a story about a single boy and the God who multiplies single acts of obedience into tidal waves. After the surge, after the chase, after the triumphant clamor that rolls like a river up the hills and through the tents, there is a quiet, the kind of quiet that follows thunder. David stands with Goliath's head heavy in his hands, not because he loves the spectacle, but because he knows what symbols do. They teach hearts what words cannot. He brings it toward the camp, a grotesque proof that fear is not invincible. The people part. They stare. Some laugh because laughter is what you do when you cannot process relief. Some weep. Some fall to their knees. The king summons the boy again. Saul looks at David like a man waking from anesthesia, not sure if he was injured or healed. "Whose son are you?" he asks, though he knows. But he is really asking something else. Whose story is this? How did it become yours? "Your servant is the son of Jesse of Bethlehem," David answers, and inside those 12 words is a world. Jesse, Bethlehem, a family, a small town where larger stories tend to begin, as if God enjoys the humility of geography. Before this valley, David sang about what he believed. After this valley, he sang about what he knew. He had tasted the truth that most of us only memorize. The battle is the Lord's. He carried the weight of a sword longer than his arm and the lightness of a heart that had learned how to trust when it mattered. Rest your gaze not on the head of the giant or the cheering of the men. Look instead at the shepherd boy-turned-warrior in the doorway of Saul's tent, and notice that he is still the boy who feels most at home in fields. His hands are steady, not intoxicated by the sudden applause of a nation. His eyes are fixed on something beyond a king's favor. Politics will come. Songs will be sung with his name in them. A spear will one day fly across a room aimed at his life. But in this moment, he is simply David, God's beloved, God's anointed, God's instrument. Because every victory rests on the edge of a new challenge. Because every giant has cousins that know your address. We move backward again and forward again to find the thread that holds it all. David's path to the valley wasn't a straight road from pasture to glory. It was obedience to small things. 100 mornings waking early, lifting a harp before a staff, reminding his fingers who they belonged to. The choice to fetch bread when sent, not to chase battle when not called, answering his father without rolling his eyes, listening to his brothers' insults without letting bitterness write his script. The boy's heart had a shape, and it matched the grip of God's hand. We love the moment the giant falls. We tend to forget the nights that train the throw. Remember those nights. Shepherd nights are where the boy learned to sit with fear until it lost its voice. He learned the sound of a lion's step before he saw its shadow. He understood the difference between an imagined threat and a real one because shepherd work is the art of sorting panic from danger. He learned the names of the sheep, which ones liked to wander, which ones hid behind rocks and bleated for attention, which ones got tangled in thorn bushes again and again, as if the world were designed to trap them. He learned to pull wool from briars gently, to not fall in love with his own strength, to not confuse rescue with control. He wrote psalms with dirt under his fingernails and blood on his knuckles. He wrote, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," and he meant it both as poetry and as survival. He wrote, "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil," and he meant this valley, and the next one, and the one that would come in a cave when a mad king hunted him and the Lord felt quiet as stone. Worship is not an intermission from battle, it is weaponry. The sling in his hand and the song in his throat were the same skill at different speeds. Both required attention. Both punished arrogance. Both rewarded patience. Both taught him that victory without humility curdles into pride, and pride sets the table for a fall. So when he heard Goliath taunt, when he saw grown men shuffle their feet and look away, he did not mistake their fear for authority. He simply remembered his shepherd. The Philistines had a story too. They had gods with names that sound like thunder if your ears are tuned to fear. They had victories lined up on a shelf like trophies. They had champions who made other men's knees unlock. They were the empire of the day. But fear and boasting are cousins, and both are orphans. They borrow swagger to cover the echo of emptiness. We are not told the shield-bearer's name, that boy who walked before Goliath. Imagine him. He learned to carry weight that wasn't his. He learned to step in front of a man whose shadow was its own kind of weapon. He built his identity on the job of making someone else look invincible. And then he watched that invincibility evaporate. Somewhere inside him, a question sprouted like a seed in a crack. If the biggest man can fall, what can stand? The answer would come to him the way it comes to anyone who dares to ask. Not in philosophy first, but in a story where God steps into a valley and tips the scales. Saul had a story. He once was small in his own eyes, which is an excellent place for kings to start, but he did not stay there. The applause did something to him. The command to wait for the prophet and to obey precisely felt like a cage instead of a compass. He measured victory by numbers and not by obedience. So when he looked at David, something in him ached. The recognition of what he had been, the envy of what he had lost, the uneasy knowledge that God sometimes passes by men who stand tall to find boys who kneel. Eliab had a story too. He had watched oil pour past him and onto his younger brother's head. He had been measured by a God who sees the heart, and it had confused him. The field had taught him to be a man, and yet a teenage shepherd was chosen over him. So when David spoke in the camp, Eliab heard not the clear bell of faith, but the ringing in his own ears left by the words he could not forget. The Lord looks at the heart. He mistook courage for pride, because he had lost the map that led there himself. This is the mercy of the valley. It returns everyone to the truest measure. Fear will do it. Faith will too. The giant seemed immeasurable. He had numbers for everything: height, weight, spear, shield, gait. But faith measured something else. Who is the Lord? What has he done? What has he promised? Who am I because of him? Against those questions, even a giant looks like a man. David collected 5 stones not because he thought he would miss, but because faith makes room for persistence. There is an old truth we overlook. God's miracles often wear the clothes of repeated obedience. The first throw is magnificent. The second is mature. The fifth, if it comes to that, is worship. When you kneel by the brook, fill your pouch with testimonies. When you cross the field, hold the memory like a weapon. When the giant laughs, answer with a story, not of your strength, but of God's. Listen to the boy's words again. You come with sword and spear and javelin. I come in the name of the Lord. The contrast is not technique, it's allegiance. The famous line we remember isn't a taunt, it's a declaration. The battle is the Lord's. Say it until your bones believe it. The battle is the Lord's, and so victory is not pressure, it is partnership. It is not performance, it is participation. When the stone hit, it did more than pierce flesh. It punctured a lie. It told Israel that their fear had been larger than their enemy. It told the Philistines that their boast had been louder than their security. It told Saul that leadership without faith is just logistics. It told Eliab that jealousy cannot write a single story that ends well. It told David what he had suspected all along, that God delights to work through the small, the overlooked, the ones who sing while others sleep. We live with giants. Ours have different names but the same appetite: addiction, anxiety, self-hatred, debt that calls itself destiny, a diagnosis that erases your future with a word, a loneliness so heavy that even a crowded room can't lift it, a sin that looks you in the eye and says, "You will always be mine." Your giant may not wear bronze, it may wear a memory. It may have your father's voice or your own first failure's echo. It may laugh and name the place your bones will lie. Pick up your sling. Understand, your sling is not fury. It's not the clever comeback. It's not the sermon clip that made you feel brave for 90 seconds. Your sling is the life you live in the presence of God. It's the scripture you choose to memorize instead of the spiral you've memorized in the dark. It's the prayer you whisper in a locker room or a break room or a hospital corridor. It's the habit of walking toward the thing that wants to paralyze you and saying, "You come to me with what has always worked for you. But I come to you with a name you do not understand." There is a line to tuck into your heart. Giants fall where worship stands. Say it when you stand on the edge of a valley. Say it when your hands shake opening a bill. Say it when your phone buzzes with the name of someone who has hurt you. Say it when your muscles want to run, and your mind wants to hide, and your spirit wants to freeze. Giants fall where worship stands because worship turns your eyes from the thing that towers to the one who reigns. If you need to see it again, replay the moment. The boy runs, the sling sings, the stone flies, the giant falls. The crowd shatters into joy. And in that wild, holy, impossible second, the world changes direction. Keep going a little further into the aftermath. They bring the head to Jerusalem. They tuck the sword away, and it becomes a future story, a symbol that will reappear in caves and corridors, a comfort that God wastes nothing. A prince named Jonathan will soon look at David and find his own soul knit to the shepherd's, an unlikely friendship born in the wake of a giant's fall. The people begin to sing. Songs are dangerous things when you are the subject of them. David hears the lyrics that will haunt him. Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands. He does not write the song. He does not correct the math. He simply absorbs the fact that popularity can be its own valley, a battlefield of a different kind, where the giant's name is ego and his armor is praise. But in this chapter, Saul smiles at David with relief and not yet jealousy, claps his shoulder with gratitude and not yet rage. Israel looks at this boy and sees the impossible made simple. They don't know that he will one day weep over a city that could not understand him, that he will dance unashamed before the Lord, that he will fail so profoundly he will wonder if mercy can find him even there. For now, they see victory and they try to memorize it. David goes home. He returns to the sheep, at least in his mind and maybe in his body too for a time. He stands in a field at dusk and listens for wolves as the sky pours purple over the hills. He hums a new melody and adds it to an old one. He puts his sling away for the night and lifts his harp. He sings not about giants now, but about God's kindness, that long, slow river that runs through every desert. You can almost hear the lyric form, the way an artist hears a painting in his mind before the first stroke. He sings about shepherds and rods and staffs and comfort. He sings about tables set in the presence of enemies. He sings about heads anointed with oil so that joy runs down like a waterfall across the face. He sings about goodness and mercy as if they have feet that are always trying to catch up with him. He believes, not that he will never be afraid again, not that he will never face another giant. He believes that faith is not a one-time sling but a lifelong posture. He believes that the same God who held the stone steady can hold a soul steady when the soul is the dangerous thing. Listen, you can hear the echo of this valley even now. It is the echo in your chest when you think you cannot, and then you do. It is the echo in your spirit when you decide to be small on purpose. It is the echo that rattles the tin roof of shame and calls your name out of it. It is the echo that makes a mother pray over a crib at 2 in the morning with a fierceness that scares all the shadow things away. It is the echo that keeps a man from quitting, that makes a teenager put her phone down and pick her Bible up, that teaches a widow to laugh again because joy is stubborn like that. Maybe today your valley looks like a courtroom, or a classroom, or a kitchen table. Maybe you feel the weight of armor that doesn't fit because everyone expects you to fight this the way they would. Take it off. That's not rebellion. That's reverence. God did not ask you to impress him. He asked you to trust him. Walk to the brook. Reach down. Pick up a memory where God has already rescued you. Pick up a promise you wrote on a sticky note and forgot to believe. Pick up a prayer that feels too small. Collect them. Put them in your pocket. Walk toward the thing. Don't sprint for the drama of it. Run because you are eager to be done with fear. And then open your mouth and say what you need to hear yourself say. The battle is the Lord's. He will deliver. He has done it before. He will do it again. There is a moment every story reaches where you have to decide if it is a fairy tale or a testimony. Fairy tales end when the giant falls. Testimonies begin there. David's life didn't get easier because he won a fight. It got messier because he was now living forward into a calling that would cost him everything. The giant taught him that God could be trusted when it seemed impossible. Later, caves would teach him that God could be trusted when it seemed unfair. The rooftop would teach him that God could be trusted when he himself had been the giant to someone else. Failure would teach him to repent. Success would teach him to remember. But in each chapter the chorus remains. The battle is the Lord's. So where does this leave us? Not with swords in our hands, with hands open, not with applause in our ears, with God's voice under our skin, not with giant heads held high, with our hearts bowed low in gratitude for a God who loves to turn boys into men, cowards into warriors, skeptics into singers, and valleys into altars. You may be thinking, that's beautiful, but I am not David. Neither was David, he was just David. His name meant beloved. So does yours. The hero of this story is not a boy with a sling. It is the God who worked through him. That means there is room for you. Now a quiet for your soul. Close your eyes, picture the valley. Don't rush to the fall. Stand for a second on the brink with the boy. Feel your mouth go dry. Feel the sun on the back of your neck. Hear the laughter from the other side. Hear the awkward silence behind you. Remember the lion. Remember the bear. Remember the oil and the prophet and the way God found you in smaller places than this. Fill your pouch with those memories. Grip the sling you already own, the practices of prayer, of praise, of showing up. Take a breath and run. If you find yourself mid-run and the fear shouts louder, shout this back. I do not come with the weapons that made you sure. I come with the name that makes me safe. The battle is the Lord's. Here are 5 stones for your soul to keep in your pocket when the day leans heavy. First, memory. Remember what God has done. Memory turns past grace into present courage. Second, identity. Know who you are and whose you are. Beloved beats big every single time. Third, obedience. Do the next right thing. Obedience is courage in work clothes. Fourth, worship. Bend before you battle. Your kneeling crafts your knowing. Fifth, courage. Not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear write the ending. Faith is not loud, it's loyal. Hold them. Tell them to your children. Press them into the hand of a friend who needs them more than you. Watch what God does with the ordinary when it's placed in His extraordinary hands. And then when your giant falls, because it will, do what David did. Don't build a shrine to your success. Build an altar to God's faithfulness. Say it out loud so that the valley hears, and so do you. Not by sword, not by spear, but by the Lord's hand. The battle was His. The victory is His. The glory is His. Somewhere a boy puts his harp away and reaches for his sling. Somewhere a girl laces up her shoes and decides to go back into a classroom that tells her she is not enough. Somewhere a father crawls out of bed while the sky is still black and whispers a prayer over a kitchen table. Somewhere a grandmother keeps a candle burning on a windowsill. Somewhere an addict deletes a number and installs a filter and cries on the kitchen floor. Somewhere a nurse prays at an elevator. Somewhere a contractor kneels beside a half-framed wall and asks for wisdom. Somewhere a pastor closes a laptop and decides to tell the truth even if it costs him. Somewhere an enemy becomes a neighbor, a critic becomes a friend, a victim becomes a survivor. All across a world full of valleys, stones sing through the air, and the giants fall where worship stands. There is one more thing worth saying, a seed we bury for later harvest. This is not the last time a son of David will walk into a valley to face a giant no one else can defeat. One day, another shepherd will come, and he will walk into the shadow of a hill called Skull, and the laughter will be loud, and the armor will look impenetrable, and everyone will think the sword is in the other hand. He will not raise a sling. He will stretch out his hands. He will fall, and it will look like defeat, and on the third day the earth will answer and rise, and death will discover it is not the giant it thought it was. The echo will roll all the way back here, to the valley of Elah and forward to your living room, and it will say the same sentence David said, only louder and forever. The battle is the Lord's. So take heart. Take the 5 stones. Take a deep breath. Take a step. 1,000 small obediences are building a future you cannot yet see, a story whose author wastes nothing and whose arm is not too short to save. Did you hear the stone at the beginning of our time together? The way it whispered purpose through heat and dust. Hear it again now, not as the end of a fight but as the beginning of a life. The sling is in your hands. The memory of God's unfailing kindness is in your chest. The name is on your lips. Run. And when the world asks you how the giant fell, tell them the sentence that belongs to every valley. There was a boy with a sling. There was a name above all names. The battle was the Lord's, and fear forgot how to stand. Remember this too. Your valley is not your home. It is a place you pass through. Goodness and mercy are still chasing you. A table is being set even now. Oil is warming in a jar somewhere, ready to pour over your head and run down your face and remind your bones that you are beloved. One day, when the giants are long forgotten, you will look back and see 1,000 little stones shining in a path behind you like the Milky Way on a clear night. You will smile, and it will be a smile born not of triumph but of trust. It will sound like a harp in the mouth of a cave. It will taste like bread and sweet water. It will feel like the hand of a shepherd on your shoulder, leading you home. Until then, keep singing in the dark. Keep kneeling by the brook. Keep choosing faith when fear performs its rehearsed monologue. Keep moving. Keep believing that God still works miracles today, not always with spectacle, but often with a boy, a sling, a valley, and a name. And if you need to hear it one last time before you go, here it is. The line worth stitching into the hems of your days. Giants fall where worship stands. This is the story of David and Goliath. This is your story too, because the God who met a shepherd in a valley will meet you where you are. The battle is the Lord's, and in His presence, fear forgets how to breathe. If this story stirred your faith, come back for more. Let the voices of Scripture keep speaking, week after week, until your valleys become altars and your giants remember how to fall.